Before you swipe away, imagine a tiny Lincoln penny sitting in your pocket, worth more than a luxury car, more than a house down payment, more than years of savings. This is not a myth. This is real U.S. history, hiding in plain sight, and millions of these pennies have already been spent without anyone realizing what they had today. You are about to discover the top 10 most valuable Lincoln penny coins ever found, coins born from minting mistakes, wartime shortages, historic firsts, and ultra-low mintages. Coins collectors search for their entire lives. Watch closely, because number 1 is legendary. Number 10.
Imagine holding in your hand a small copper coin that tells the story of a nation, its struggles, its victories, its values, and its vision for the future. The Lincoln penny of 1959 is far more than just 1 cent. It is a chapter of American history, struck in metal and passed through countless hands across the decades. This coin marked a turning point in United States coinage because it was the year when the design of the Lincoln cent underwent a dramatic transformation after 50 years. Of the wheat ears reverse that had been introduced in 1909 to honor the centennial of Abraham Lincoln's birth, the United States Mint unveiled a brand new reverse design in 1959 that would endure for another half-century. This new design was the Lincoln Memorial, and it became one of the most recognizable images in American coinage history. The 1959 Lincoln penny was born during the presidency of Dwight D. Eisenhower, a time when America was standing tall after World War II and asserting itself in the Cold War era. The coin was intended to connect the legacy of Abraham Lincoln, the great emancipator, with the nation's continuing journey toward democracy, freedom, and unity. The obverse still displayed the familiar bust of Abraham Lincoln, first created by Victor David Brenner in 1909. But now the reverse design showed the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., a structure dedicated in 1922 that itself had become a symbol of national identity, designed by Frank Gasparo, who would later become chief engraver of the United States Mint. The Lincoln Memorial reverse was carefully detailed, even including a tiny representation of the seated statue of Lincoln visible between the central columns. This was the first time in United
States history that a person appeared on both the obverse and reverse of the same coin, a subtle but powerful statement about Lincoln's lasting impact. The 1959 penny was struck primarily in bronze and alloy, consisting of 95% copper with
the balance being tin and zinc, and it weighed 11 grams and measured 19 millimeters in diameter. It had a plain edge and was struck at 3 different mints: Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco. Though in that year, Philadelphia did not place a mint mark on its coins. The Denver Mint used the familiar D mark, and San Francisco the S mark. These distinctions have long fascinated collectors because mint marks often determine scarcity, rarity, and long-term value. From a historical standpoint, the introduction of the Lincoln Memorial design in 1959 was not just a change of imagery, but also a reflection of the cultural climate of mid-20th century America. The United States was entering a period of great change. The civil rights movement was gaining momentum, and Lincoln's role as the president who ended slavery was increasingly invoked as a symbol of justice and equality. By placing the Lincoln Memorial on the penny, the Mint was making a deliberate statement about continuity with the past, while also addressing the values that America sought to uphold in the present. Millions of 1959 pennies were struck and released into circulation, making them common in everyday commerce. Yet their symbolic importance made them special from the start. For many Americans, it was the first new design change on the cent in their lifetimes, and collectors immediately began saving examples of the coin, both in circulation condition and in proof sets produced for collectors. The proof coins of 1959 were struck at the Philadelphia Mint with a mirror-like finish and extra-sharp detail, and these coins quickly became prized among hobbyists, for coin collectors and historians alike. The 1959 penny stands out for more reasons than design. Alone, it marks the 150th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's birth in 1809, the 50th anniversary of the original Lincoln cent of 1909, and the introduction of a new chapter that would last until the design change in 2009, when the bicentennial of Lincoln's birth brought yet another redesign. In that sense, the 1959 penny occupies a unique place, bridging the classic wheat ear cents of the first half of the 20th century and the modern memorial cents of the later 20th and early 21st centuries. The story of the 1959 penny also involves the artistry of Frank Gasparo, who, despite initial criticism for his design, would go on to create other iconic works including the Eisenhower dollar and Susan B. Anthony dollar. His Lincoln Memorial reverse was initially considered too simple by some, but in time it became one of the longest-lasting designs in U.S. coinage history, lasting exactly 50 years from 1959 to 2008. In terms of varieties and errors, the 1959 penny is also famous because of certain rare misstrikes and anomalies. One of the most well-known is the controversial so-called 1959 D wheat reverse cent coin that appears to combine the obverse of a 1959 Denver penny with the reverse of a wheat cent. This piece has sparked debate for decades, with some arguing it is a genuine mint error and others claiming it is an altered coin. Regardless, the mystery has fueled interest in the 1959 issue and made it a subject of fascination in numismatic circles. When we consider the broader circulation of the 1959 penny, we see how it became woven into the fabric of daily American life. This was the coin that children placed in piggy banks that soldiers carried overseas, that shopkeepers handed out as change in countless small transactions. It was unremarkable in value but extraordinary in symbolism, linking every ordinary American to the legacy of Lincoln and the values he represented today. When collectors look back on the 1959 penny, they see more than a copper coin. They see a milestone in design history, a reflection of mid-20th century America, and a reminder of how even the smallest denomination can carry enormous meaning in the story of a nation, from its alloy composition to its mintage figures, from its artistry to its cultural symbolism. The 1959 Lincoln penny is a treasure of history, one that continues to captivate numismatists, historians, and everyday Americans alike. The Lincoln penny 1963 coin stands as one of the most fascinating chapters in American numismatic history. A coin that seems ordinary to the untrained eye, yet carries with it layers of heritage, politics, economics, artistry, and symbolism that define an entire era. To understand the story of the 1963 Lincoln penny, you must first travel back to the origins of the Lincoln cent itself, in 1909, when the United States celebrated the centennial of the birth of Abraham Lincoln. President Theodore Roosevelt, who believed that American coinage should be bold, artistic, and filled with meaning, personally encouraged the replacement of the Indian head cent with a new design that would forever change American coinage. Victor David Brenner, a Lithuanian-born sculptor, was chosen to design the new cent, and he placed the profile of Abraham Lincoln on the obverse, creating the very first regular issue coin in American history to feature a real historical figure rather than an allegorical representation. This decision was revolutionary and deeply symbolic, as it paid tribute to the 16th president and his role in preserving the Union. From that point onward, the Lincoln cent became not just a piece of currency, but a national icon produced in massive numbers throughout the decades. The coin traveled with soldiers in 2 world wars, sat in the pockets of farmers and factory workers, rang in the cash registers of small-town America, and became one of the most recognizable coins in the world. By the time the year 1963 arrived, the Lincoln cent had already seen over half a century of continuous production and was entering an era defined by Cold War tensions, rapid economic expansion, and cultural transformation. The 1963 Lincoln penny holds significance because it belongs to the last full decade, when pennies were struck primarily from a composition of 95% copper and 5% zinc and tin. A metallic formula that had defined the Lincoln cent since 1909, this heavy copper alloy gave the coin its distinctive reddish-brown appearance, and weight collectors today treasure the 1963 issues because they are among the last to carry that rich traditional feel, before later decades introduced changes to composition and luster. In the 1980s, the penny would transition to a copper-plated zinc core, but in 1963, the coin still embodied the original vision of Brenner and the early 20th century minting tradition. The obverse of the 1963 penny features the right-facing portrait of Abraham Lincoln, his bust sharply detailed with the word liberty to the left, the date 1963 to the right, and the motto, "In God We Trust," arching above his head. This was a period of strong and crisp die engraving, and many examples of 1963 cents exhibit sharp details, making them popular for high-grade mint state collections. The reverse displays the classic wheat ears design first introduced in 1909, 2 stylized stalks of Durham wheat encircle the denomination 1 cent, with the inscription, United States of America, and the motto E pluribus unum, positioned above this wheat reverse design, had been a staple of the cent for more than 50 years until 1958, when it was replaced by the Lincoln Memorial reverse. However, the 1963 coin still carried this iconic design in its final years of production, and that is one of the reasons collectors hold it. Dear in terms of mintage, the year 1963 was remarkable with production numbers in the billions. The Philadelphia Mint produced hundreds of millions of coins, and the Denver Mint struck even more with the mint mark D placed just below the date. Coins from Philadelphia bore no mint mark, while Denver issues carry. The small d, both varieties are common in circulation today, but high quality. Mint state examples are highly prized by collectors, especially those with strong red luster coins graded MS65 or higher often command significant premiums because the copper surface of pennies is prone to oxidation and spotting, making pristine. Examples increasingly rare over time. The economic backdrop of 1963 adds further depth to the history of this coin. The United States was in the midst of the post-World War II boom. Consumer spending was high, suburban growth was at its peak, and the penny itself was still considered a useful coin in everyday commerce. A single cent could buy a stick of gum, a piece of candy, or even make a difference in gasoline purchases, which hovered around 30 cents a gallon in that era. The penny of 1963 circulated through millions of small-town grocery stores, bustling city diners, school vending machines, and corner newsstands, and thus it became woven into the daily lives of Americans in a way that later decades with inflation could never replicate. Culturally, the year 1963 was also significant. President John F. Kennedy occupied the White House, inspiring a new generation with his speeches on civil rights and the space race tragically. His assassination in November 1963 marked one of the darkest moments in American history, and it forever tied the coins of that year to an atmosphere of both hope and heartbreak. While the Lincoln penny bore the face of another martyred president, the coin circulating in 1963 carried with it a symbolic continuity between Lincoln's legacy of unity and Kennedy's unfinished dream of progress and equality. From a numismatic standpoint, certain varieties and errors in the 1963 penny series are especially valuable. Collectors hunt for doubled die obverses repunched, mint marks, and coins struck with misaligned dies which give them unique and rare qualities. Some 1963 cents also exhibit strong proof-like surfaces when produced in specially polished dies, particularly those from the Philadelphia Mint that released proof sets that year. These proof coins with their mirrored fields and frosted devices stand apart from the standard circulation strikes and are considered treasures for collectors who seek the best examples of mid-20th century coinage. The 1963 penny also represents the end of an era in metal value. By the late 20th century, the price of copper began to rise so high that the intrinsic value of a copper cent came dangerously close to exceeding its face value. This economic reality led the United States Mint to eventually change the composition in 1982 to copper-plated zinc, meaning that every 1963 cent is now technically worth more than 1 cent in metal content. Though melting them is illegal in the United States, the awareness of this underlying value has added to the interest in hoarding and collecting older copper pennies, especially those from the early 60s, as you explore the full history of the Lincoln Penny 1963 coin. You find that it is not merely a small piece of copper, but a witness to a world in transition. It circulated during the rise of the civil rights movement, during Cold War anxieties during the space race, and during one of the most heartbreaking tragedies in American presidential history. It is a coin that carries with it echoes of the nation's past, while also foreshadowing the changes that would soon reshape American currency design and composition. Collectors value it for its beauty. Historians value it for its context and ordinary. People remember it for the way it jingled in their pockets, bought candy for their children, or rolled across kitchen tables during family games. The Lincoln Penny of 1963 may be small in size, but it looms large in history. It tells the story of Abraham Lincoln, Victor David Brenner, the rise of modern coinage, mid-century American life, and the ever-shifting tides of economy and culture that shape the coins we carry every day. And when you hold a 1963 penny in your hand, you are not just holding copper, you are holding a piece of the American journey preserved forever in a single cent. Imagine holding in your hand a small copper coin from the year 1964, a coin that on the surface looks ordinary, but in reality it carries a remarkable story that stretches across American history, economics, minting technology, and even global events. This is the Lincoln penny of 1964, a piece that belongs to one of the most collected coin series in the entire world, and yet its year of issue is one that collectors, historians, and numismatists look back on as both fascinating and transitional. The Lincoln cent has always been more than just pocket change, ever since it was first introduced in 1909 to honor the centennial birthday of Abraham Lincoln, the beloved 16th President of the United States. The coin became a symbol of American pride. It was the very first circulating coin of the United States to feature the portrait of a real person, and that person was Lincoln, a man who stood for unity, freedom, and equality. By 1964, the coin had already been in circulation for 55 years, and the portrait of Lincoln designed by Victor David Brenner had become instantly recognizable to generations of Americans. Yet 1964 was no ordinary year for the United States or for the Lincoln penny. It was a time when the nation was in the midst of significant political and social change. The early 1960s had seen the civil rights movement gain momentum. President John F. Kennedy had been assassinated in 1963, and the country was still grieving, and in 1964 the United States was also transitioning its coinage system to respond to rising costs of metal production and growing demand for coins as the population expanded. The 1964 Lincoln cent is particularly interesting because it was one of the last years in which the coin was struck in the traditional composition of 95% copper and 5% tin and zinc. This classic bronze alloy had been the standard since 1909, with only a brief interruption during World War II, when steel cents were issued in 1943 to conserve copper for the war effort. After the war, the mint returned to the bronze composition, and by 1964, Americans were very familiar with the weight, feel, and color of these pennies, each one carrying the warm red or brown tones of copper. What makes the 1964 penny stand out in history is not only its composition, but also its mintage numbers and the context of coinage demand. During that time, the United States Mint struck an extraordinary number of pennies in 1964. In fact, it was one of the highest mintage years ever recorded, with more than 6 billion Lincoln cents produced between the Philadelphia and Denver mints. This enormous output was driven by a coin shortage crisis that gripped the United States in the early 1960s. Businesses, banks, and citizens were experiencing difficulties in obtaining enough small change to carry out daily transactions, and the government responded by massively increasing production of cents, nickels, dimes, and quarters. The 1964 penny is also historically significant because it was part of the final chapter before major changes to U.S. coinage took place in 1965. The Coinage Act eliminated silver from circulating dimes and quarters and reduced the silver content in half dollars. At the same time, the Lincoln penny continued to be made of bronze, but by 1982, the rising cost of copper would lead the mint to change the composition of pennies to a copper-plated zinc plancher, meaning that the 1964 cent represents one of the last high-production years of the classic heavy copper alloy, which collectors today cherish for its historical authenticity and solid metallic value. From a design perspective, the 1964 Lincoln cent still retained the classic wheat ears reverse, which had been replaced in 1959 with the Lincoln Memorial Reverse in honor of the 150th anniversary of Lincoln's birth. Therefore, the 1964 penny is firmly in the Memorial Reverse era, featuring Frank Gasparo's depiction of the Lincoln Memorial on the reverse side. This design allowed for an unusual detail. When viewed closely under magnification, one can see a tiny image of the statue of Abraham Lincoln seated inside the memorial, making the 1964 penny the first coin in American history to feature the same person. Both on the obverse and somewhere on the reverse, Lincoln appears twice, a small hidden detail that fascinates collectors. When studying the 1964 penny, one must also look at varieties, errors, and mint marks the Philadelphia Mint struck coins without a mint mark, while the Denver Mint placed the small d under the date. Collectors pay close attention to both versions, since billions were produced, but only certain error coins stand out. For instance, Some 1964 cents display double die varieties. On either the obverse or reverse leading to sharply doubled letters or numerals, others may feature repunched mint marks from the Denver Mint. These error coins are sought after and can command significant value far beyond face value in the collectors. Market, the cultural backdrop of the 1964 penny, also makes it special. This was the year when President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act into law. It was the year the Beatles arrived in America, changing music forever. It was the year the Vietnam War was escalating and America was reshaping its identity. In all these moments, people carried these very pennies in their pockets, buying newspapers, paying for bus fares, or saving them in jars. Each coin circulated in the hands of every day. Americans making the 1964 penny a silent witness to one of the most transformative periods in modern history. Collectors often categorize 1964 pennies based on their condition and color, ranging from bright red uncirculated examples to brown circulated pieces because copper reacts with air and moisture. The color of the coin plays a large role in its value. Uncirculated red specimens can fetch strong prices, while common circulated examples still trade for only a few cents over face value, yet the emotional and historical worth of a 1964 penny cannot be measured by money alone. It is a reminder of a time when coinage was heavier, more substantial, and more deeply tied to the daily lives of the American people. The story of the 1964 Lincoln penny is not just about a single year of issue, it is about continuity, tradition, and change. It bridges the era of pre-1965 silver coinage with the modern clad coinage. It connects the classic bronze composition with the later copper. Plated zinc coins, it reflects a booming America struggling with shortages, yet moving forward with innovation. And it represents a piece of Abraham Lincoln's legacy that continued to be honored through generations every time someone glanced at that humble coin in their hand. As you dive deeper into the world of the 1964 penny, you realize that this small copper coin is a time capsule, a historical marker that speaks of industry, politics, design, culture, and memory. It is not rare in numbers, but it is rich in story, and that story makes it one of the most captivating coins for collectors and historians alike. And this is why when we speak of the Lincoln cent, the 1964 issue always deserves a special place in the conversation. Imagine holding in your hand a small copper-colored coin that at first glance looks like any ordinary penny, but when you look closer, you realize that it carries the legacy of a nation in transition. The Lincoln penny of 1965 is more than just a piece of metal. It is a symbol of American history, economics, politics, and culture. At a time when the United States was facing dramatic change, the coin minted in 1965 was part of a story that began many decades earlier in 1909, when the Lincoln cent was first introduced to honor the 100th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's birth, created by sculptor Victor David Brenner. The design with Lincoln's portrait on the obverse and the wheat stalks on the reverse was groundbreaking. It was the first time a real historical figure appeared on a circulating American coin. This design quickly became a national favorite, and it set the stage for the evolution of the cent through the 20th century. By the 1960s, America was experiencing social upheaval, scientific breakthroughs, and economic challenges. The year 1965 was especially critical in United States coinage because it marked the beginning of the end for silver in circulating coins due to a nationwide coin shortage and the rising cost of silver. Congress passed the Coinage Act of 1965, which eliminated silver from dimes and quarters and reduced the silver content in half dollars. Although the Lincoln cent itself did not contain silver, this legislation directly influenced the minting environment of the penny during this period and increased its importance as one of the few stable copper-based coins still trusted by the public. The 1965 Lincoln penny continued the memorial reverse design introduced in 1959 to mark the 150th anniversary of Lincoln's birth, designed by Frank Gasparo. The reverse showed the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., and it was remarkable because if you looked closely, you could see a tiny representation of the statue of Lincoln inside the memorial. This made the Lincoln cent the only circulating coin at the time to feature the same president on both sides. The obverse still carried the iconic image of Lincoln with the inscriptions, "In God We Trust, Liberty," and the date, 1965, while the reverse featured the words, "United States of America, e pluribus unum," and 1 cent. The simplicity of this design belied the complexity of the era. From a technical standpoint, the 1965 penny was struck in copper alloy, specifically 95% copper, and 5% tin and zinc weighing 11 grams with a diameter of 19 millimeters and a plain edge. The Philadelphia Mint was the main producer of these coins in 1965, and because of special minting regulations during the mid-1960s, the mint mark practice was temporarily suspended to discourage coin hoarding. This meant that all 1965 pennies were issued without mint marks, regardless of their place of production, an unusual historical detail that makes them stand out among collectors. The mintage numbers for the 1965 penny were enormous, with over 1 billion pieces struck, which might make it seem like an ordinary year. However, within this immense production run are nuances that fascinate historians, numismatists, and collectors alike. Striking quality varied widely due to the pressure on the mints to produce coins quickly to combat shortages. As a result, you will find examples that are weakly struck with poor details alongside sharp, brilliant strikes, suitable for collection. This wide range gives modern collectors challenges in grading and evaluating the true value of 1965. Cents, economically, the cent in 1965 was worth far more in purchasing power than today it could buy a small piece of candy or add meaningful change toward a bus ride, and this value gave it an everyday presence in the lives of Americans. The coin passed through countless hands in grocery stores, movie theaters, diners, and gas stations, each penny a silent witness to the culture of mid-20th century America. The Lincoln cent of 1965, therefore, is not just a numismatic artifact. It is a time capsule of life in the Johnson administration era, when the United States was dealing with the Vietnam War civil rights struggles, and the space race collectors today value the 1965 penny, not because of rarity and mintage, but because of its historical context and condition. Ordinary worn examples are worth only face value, but uncirculated examples with brilliant luster can command premiums, and high-grade certified specimens are prized for their sharpness and originality. Errors and varieties also intrigue collectors, including off-center strikes, die breaks, and double dies, which occasionally appear among the massive output of 1965. These errors transform an ordinary penny into a valuable collectible, sometimes fetching hundreds or even thousands of dollars at auction. From a broader historical view, the 1965 Lincoln penny represents continuity amid change. The United States Mint was moving away from traditional practices, yet the penny held firm to its copper base and iconic Lincoln image. It reflects the determination to maintain a sense of stability during turbulent years in American history. The story of this coin stretches far beyond its metal. It tells us about economic shifts, government policies, artistic design choices, and the enduring memory of Abraham Lincoln as a unifying figure for the nation. When you hold a 1965 Lincoln penny, you are holding a piece of the story of how America adapted to coin shortages, how it navigated the debate over silver and base metals, how it honored the memory of Lincoln while facing new challenges, and how a tiny coin circulated in the millions can today unlock the secrets of an entire era in history. If you hold a 1966 Lincoln penny in your hand, you may not realize the fascinating story it carries, because this small copper coin is more than just a piece of change. It is a window into American history, politics, economy, and culture, and the year 1966 itself was a time of transformation in the United States, and that makes this penny more than just metal. It makes it a relic of a shifting nation. To understand the 1966 penny, you need to know the background of the Lincoln cent, first introduced in 1909 to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the birth of Abraham Lincoln. Designed by Victor David Brenner, it became the first American coin to feature a real person instead of a symbolic figure. And this change was significant because it marked a new way of remembering history through the nation's coinage. The original wheat reverse design lasted from 1909 until 1958, and in 1959, the cent was changed to feature the Lincoln Memorial on the reverse to honor the 150th anniversary of Lincoln's birth. That means by 1966, the Lincoln Memorial design was still relatively new, less than a decade old, and collectors were adjusting to the shift away from the wheat penny. The 1966 Lincoln penny was minted in a time of crisis in American coinage. During the early 1960s, the United States experienced a nationwide coin shortage. People were hoarding silver coins because the price of silver was rising, and that made it harder for banks and businesses to keep coins in circulation. The mint responded. with several measures including striking more coins and reducing mint marks, in fact, from 1965 through 1967. The United States Mint removed mint marks altogether. So the 1966 penny has no mint mark, no matter where it was produced, whether at Philadelphia, Denver, or San Francisco. You will never see a D or S on a 1966 cent. This was not a mistake. It was a deliberate policy to discourage hoarding and to make coins more uniform during the shortage. The composition of the 1966 penny remained the same. As it had been for decades since 1909, it was made of a bronze alloy consisting of 95% copper and 5% tin and zinc. It weighed 11 grams and had a diameter of 19 millimeters, struck with a plain edge. In terms of design, the obverse still carried Victor David Brenner's portrait of Abraham Lincoln, facing right with the word Liberty to the left and the date 1966 to the right. Above Lincoln's head, the motto, "In God We Trust," appeared proudly at the top, on the reverse. Frank Gasparo's design of the Lincoln Memorial stood as a symbol of unity and freedom, with the denomination 1 cent and the words, United States of America, along with the motto, E Pluribus Unum, placed above the memorial. In terms of mintage numbers, the Philadelphia Mint produced over 288 billion pieces. In 1966, Denver and San Francisco also struck cents, but again with no mint mark. It is important to remember that while the coin shortage was still affecting circulation, the mint was striking billions of pennies to keep commerce flowing. This enormous production means that most 1966 pennies are common today and can still be found in circulation. However, the historical context and certain varieties make them very interesting for collectors. While the vast majority of 1966 cents are ordinary business strikes, there were also special mint sets issued instead of regular proof sets from 1965 to 1967. The Mint released special mint sets, sometimes abbreviated SMS. These were higher quality coins with a better strike and more polished appearance, though not quite the same as proofs. The 1966 SMS cents can show sharper details and brilliant surfaces, and today they hold value for collectors who focus on these transitional years. Another fascinating detail is that even though mint marks were removed during this period, the San Francisco Mint played a large role in striking coins, and this makes the 1966 issues a little mysterious, since you cannot identify where an individual coin was struck. Some collectors enjoy this uniqueness because it stands apart from nearly every other period in U.S. coinage history when mint marks were the norm when it comes to value. The average 1966 penny in circulated condition is worth just face value. However, in uncirculated condition, they can command higher prices, particularly in grades MS65 and above. Examples from the special mint sets can be worth even more, depending on eye appeal, luster, and strike quality. There are also rare varieties and errors that can make a 1966 penny worth a surprising amount. For example, collectors look for double die obverse varieties where certain details like Liberty or the date show noticeable. Doubling other errors like off-center strikes, die cracks, or striking on a defective planche can also add significant value. These minting anomalies are always highly sought after because they represent rare mistakes in a time when the mint was under intense pressure to produce billions of coins without delay. Beyond the physical aspects, the 1966 penny tells us a lot about the United States in that year politically and socially. America was deep in the Vietnam War. Civil rights struggles were ongoing, the space race was heating up, and President Lyndon B. Johnson was pushing forward with his Great Society programs. The economy was booming, but inflation and monetary issues like coin shortages were front-page news. This little cent circulated through the hands of people buying gas for under 40 cents a gallon or a loaf of bread for around 22 cents. It was a symbol of everyday commerce in a country experiencing both prosperity and turbulence. When you tell the story of the 1966 penny, you are telling the story of American resilience. You are looking at how the government solved a nationwide coin shortage by removing mint marks and changing its distribution strategy. You are looking at how coin design and composition carried forward traditions of honoring Lincoln and reminding the people of unity and strength. You are looking at how collectors can find beauty in the smallest variations in strike and condition, making even a common coin a treasure to study and appreciate. So the next time you come across a 1966 Lincoln penny, remember that it is not just one cent. It is a chapter of history minted in copper. It is a product of a nation balancing war, prosperity, change, and innovation. It is a piece that still resonates with collectors. historians, and anyone who wants to hold the past in their hand. And that is why the 1966 Lincoln penny is more than money, it is memory, legacy, and story. Welcome to a world where every small piece of copper tells a story, where history lives not just in books, but in the very coins we hold in our hands. Today, we are unlocking the incredible journey of the 1967 Lincoln penny, a coin that may seem ordinary to many, but to collectors, historians, and anyone fascinated by American heritage, it represents a snapshot of one of the most pivotal eras in the United States. The 1960s were a decade of transformation, a time when the nation faced cultural shifts, political changes, and technological advances, and in the middle of it all, the United States Mint was producing coins that carried the face of Abraham Lincoln, one of the most revered figures in American history, and in 1967, the Lincoln penny emerged, not only as a medium of exchange but as a historical artifact connected to the very fabric of the American story. Now, before we dive deeper, let me set the stage. Imagine holding a 1967 Lincoln cent in your hand. At first glance, it looks like just another penny, reddish-brown or darkened with age, showing Lincoln's profile on the obverse designed by Victor David Brenner, a design that has endured since 1909, and on the reverse the Lincoln Memorial designed by Frank Gasparo, standing as a symbol of unity and resilience. But when we peel back the surface, we begin to see more than metal. We see a piece of history shaped by decisions from the United States. Mint shaped by economic challenges, shaped by a nation in the midst of change. And that is why the 1967 penny deserves a closer look to understand why it matters. Let us start with the historical background. During the mid-1960s, America was facing a serious coin shortage, a shortage that began in the early 1960s when the public started hoarding silver coins due to rising silver prices. This created a crisis for the mint as everyday commerce was being affected. The government had to step in to stabilize the situation, and in 1965, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Coinage Act, which not only changed the composition of silver coins, but also introduced drastic measures to ensure the availability of coins in circulation. One of the measures included removing mint marks from coins between 1965 and 1967, which is why the 1967 Lincoln cent does not carry any mint mark at all, whether it was struck in Philadelphia, Denver, or San Francisco. This was intentional to discourage collectors from hoarding coins by mint origin. The idea was to make every coin uniform and to shift the focus back to using them in daily commerce rather than saving them for rarity value. This decision makes the 1967 penny especially interesting because it is one of those rare years where mint marks simply disappeared, and that fact alone makes it stand apart in the long history of the Lincoln cent. Now let us talk about production. The 1967 Lincoln penny was struck in enormous numbers with over 2 billion coins released into circulation. The composition of the coin followed the same specifications that had been used since 1909, consisting of 95% copper and 5% tin and zinc, giving it that familiar reddish-brown appearance. When fresh from the mint, the weight of the coin was 3.11 grams with a diameter of 19 millimeters and a plain edge. But beyond the numbers, each of these coins carried a story of the times, a story of a nation grappling with inflation, international conflict, and the space race. The Lincoln penny of 1967 was not just money, it was part of everyday life. Whether used to buy candy newspapers or even placed into savings jars across American households, children flipped them in playgrounds, adults handed them across counters, and collectors noticed them for their historical oddity of having no mint mark. What also makes this coin historically significant is the introduction of the so-called special mint sets between 1965 and 1967. The United States Mint replaced traditional proof sets with these special issues. They were struck with greater care than regular circulation coins, but not quite to the same standard as proofs the 1967 special mint set. Therefore gives us another dimension to the story of this penny for collectors. It represented a transitional period in U.S. coinage history, and today, these sets hold a unique place in numismatic collections. Let us also explore the artistry. The obverse of the coin features the right-facing bust of Abraham Lincoln designed by Victor David Brenner way back in 1909 to commemorate the centennial of Lincoln's birth. This design became iconic, and the 1967 penny is part of that legacy. The reverse showcases the Lincoln Memorial designed by Frank Gasparo, first introduced in 1959, marking the 150th anniversary of Lincoln's birth. What is fascinating is that if you look closely at the memorial design on the reverse of the coin, you can actually see a tiny representation of the statue of Lincoln seated inside the memorial this level. Of detail is often overlooked, but it speaks to the craftsmanship and symbolism invested in the coin. Now, in terms of value, the 1967 Lincoln penny in circulated condition is usually worth just its face value, yet in higher grades, and especially in mint state or as part of a special mint set, it begins to command collector interest. Certain examples graded MS66 or higher by professional grading services can fetch significantly more, and even though it was minted in massive quantities, the fact that mint marks were absent makes pristine examples a key find for dedicated collectors. The story of the 1967 penny is not only about minting practices and collector value, but also about its place in the social and cultural fabric of America. It was a year marked by the Vietnam War, by civil rights struggles, by cultural revolutions, and by a nation trying to redefine itself. Coins like the Lincoln penny circulated in pockets and purses during all of this, making them silent witnesses to the events of their time. Every single one of those billions of pennies carried the face of a leader who had guided the country through its most challenging period a century earlier, and his presence on the coin was a reminder of unity and resilience. To Americans living in turbulent times, as we reflect on the 1967 Lincoln cent, we see that it is more than copper. It is a key to unlocking stories of economics, politics, culture, and art. It is an example of how even the smallest objects can carry immense meaning and connect us directly to history. So when you hold a 1967 penny, you are holding not just a coin, but a chapter of America itself. Imagine holding in your hand a small piece of copper that seems so ordinary, so simple, so common, that most people would not think twice before dropping it into a jar or passing it across a counter. But what if I told you that this tiny coin, the Lincoln penny minted in 1968, carries with it a rich story of American history, economics, politics, artistry, and everyday life? A story that begins decades before its creation and extends far beyond its small size. A story that connects Abraham Lincoln, the beloved 16th President of the United States, with the turbulent changes of the 20th century, and with the very fabric of the American people who use these coins every single day. The Lincoln penny is more than just a coin. It is a symbol of endurance, of tradition, and of national pride, and in 1968 it entered a chapter of its history that reflected the nation's evolution at that time. To understand the 1968 Lincoln penny, we must first journey back to its origins in 1909. When the United States Mint first introduced the Lincoln cent to commemorate the centennial of Abraham Lincoln's birth, it was the first American coin to feature a real historical figure, breaking away from classical imagery and placing the face of Lincoln on the obverse designed by Victor David Brenner. The penny became an instant classic, but as decades passed, the coin went through countless subtle changes, from its metal composition to its mint marks to the very details of its design. And every one of these changes tells us something about the times in which the coin was struck. By 1968, America was experiencing a decade of dramatic transformation. The Vietnam War raged, civil rights movements reshaped society, and the culture was shifting in profound ways. Even the world of coinage reflected these changes during the early 1960s. Rising silver prices forced the government to rethink its coinage system, leading to the removal of silver from dimes and quarters in 1965, and causing widespread interest in what metals were being used for everyday money. The penny remained primarily a copper coin at this time, but that status itself would eventually change in later years. The year 1968 was also significant because of the restoration of mint marks on United States coins. Beginning in 1965, mint marks had been deliberately removed as part of a strategy to discourage coin hoarding, and speculation collectors at the time had been setting aside too many coins, creating shortages in circulation. The government wanted to stop this behavior, but by 1968 the situation had stabilized, and mint marks returned to coins once again. So for the Lincoln penny of 1968, you will find examples from multiple mints: the Philadelphia Mint, which produced coins without a mint mark, the Denver Mint with its D mint mark, and the San Francisco Mint with its S mint mark. And it was here that the 1968 S proof coins were produced, high-quality mirror finish coins intended specifically for collectors. When you examine a 1968 penny, the obverse side continues to feature the portrait of Abraham Lincoln designed by Brenner, with the word "Liberty" to the left, the date to the right, and the phrase "In God." We trust above it is a design so familiar to Americans that it almost disappears into the background of life, but every detail was chosen deliberately to honor the president who led the nation through its greatest crisis. The reverse of the 1968 penny still displayed the wheat ears design, which had been used since 1909. Or rather, to be precise, the Lincoln Memorial reverse had already been introduced in 1959 on the 150th anniversary of Lincoln's birth. So in 1968, the penny showed the Lincoln Memorial, a bold design by Frank Gasparo. And if you look closely, you can even see the small-seated figure of Lincoln inside the memorial, a coin within a coin, so to speak, a detail that continues to fascinate collectors to this day. From a technical perspective, the 1968 Lincoln pennies were composed of 95% copper and 5% zinc and tin, a composition that had been standard since 1864. This gave the coin its familiar reddish-brown color, though over time pennies can develop tones from bright red to deep brown, depending on how they were stored and circulated for collectors. The condition of a 1968 penny plays a critical role in its value. Red, uncirculated examples, especially from the San Francisco proof issues, can command strong premiums while heavily circulated. Brown examples remain common and inexpensive in the modern market, but the significance of the 1968 penny goes beyond rarity and value. It reflects a moment in American history when tradition met change. The return of mint marks the continuation of the Lincoln Memorial reverse, the enduring portrait of Lincoln himself, and the production of proof sets for a growing community of collectors. All of these elements make the 1968 penny an essential part of the broader story of United States coinage. If we dive even deeper into the world of coin collecting, we see how the 1968 penny connects to trends that continue today. Coin roll hunters search through thousands of pennies to find mint state gems or error coins, and 1968 offers its share of these errors, double dies off center strikes, clipped planchets, and other striking anomalies that give insight into the minting process. Itself, collectors treasure these mistakes because they represent moments when the rigid precision of the mint gave way to human or mechanical error, turning ordinary coins into rare pieces of history. Furthermore, the 1968 penny illustrates the rise of coin collecting in the United States during the mid-20th century. Organizations like the American Numismatic Association grew in membership, coin shows flourished, and the United States Mint itself began catering more directly to hobbyists with proof and mint sets. The inclusion of the 1968 S proof penny in these sets marked a deliberate acknowledgement of the growing importance of collectors to the life of American coinage. When we look at the 1968 penny in the broader timeline of Lincoln cents, it stands as a bridge between the older tradition of the wheatback pennies and the modern era that would eventually lead to drastic changes in composition in 1982 when the penny shifted to primarily zinc with only a thin copper coating. This makes the 1968 copper penny a tangible link to a past era when coins still carried the weight and feel of real metal. If you hold in your hand a Lincoln penny dated 1972, you are not just looking at a small piece of copper. You are holding a fragment of American history, a coin that carries with it the story of a nation, its people, its economy, and its traditions. The 1972 Lincoln penny is more than just a cent. It is a continuation of a design that had already become iconic. By the time of its striking, the Lincoln cent, first introduced in 1909, was the first regular issue U.S. coin to bear the portrait of a real person, and that person was Abraham Lincoln, the 16th President of the United States, the man who preserved the Union through the Civil War and whose leadership forever shaped the country. The decision to honor Lincoln on the cent in 1909 was timed with the 100th anniversary of his birth, and ever since then his image has remained on the cent, making it one of the longest-running coin designs in American history. By the time we reach 1972, the Lincoln penny was already more than 6 decades old, and it had gone through some changes, most notably the addition of the Lincoln Memorial on the reverse in 1959 to mark the 150th anniversary of Lincoln's birth. This new reverse replaced the original wheat ears design that had been on the cent from 1909 to 1958, so the 1972 cent belongs firmly in the Memorial cent era, which ran from 1959 until 2008. When the Lincoln Bicentennial Series began, the 1972 cent was struck at 3 locations: the Philadelphia Mint, the Denver Mint, and The San Francisco Mint. The Philadelphia issue bears no mint mark. The Denver issue bears a small D under the date. And the San Francisco issue, usually struck as proofs, bears an S. One of the most important reasons collectors talk about the 1972 penny is because of its famous doubled die obverse variety. This is one of the most dramatic and significant doubled die cents in U.S. history. Doubling occurs during the die-making process when the die receives more than one impression from the master, hub. But the impressions are misaligned. The result is clear separation and doubling of design elements on the struck coins in the case of the 1972 doubled die obverse. The doubling is bold and highly visible on the date and on the lettering. Liberty. And in God we trust. There is no need for magnification to see the doubling on strong examples. This makes it a favorite among collectors. There are actually multiple recognized doubled die varieties for the 1972 cent, with the most famous being known as FS 101. This is the major variety that commands strong premiums in all grades. The doubling is obvious, and collectors consider it one of the key varieties of the Lincoln cent series. There are other minor double die varieties for 1972 as well, including FS 102 through FS 109, but these are much less dramatic and usually require magnification to confirm still. For the specialist collector, they hold interest because they represent the different stages and types of hub doubling that can occur. The 1972 Lincoln cent was struck in huge numbers at the Philadelphia Mint alone. More than 2.5 billion coins were produced. The Denver Mint added another 2.5 billion, while the San Francisco Mint struck over 3 million. Proof coins. The sheer mintage numbers ensure that the 1972 cent is common in circulation and easily found in worn grades. But it is the doubled die that transforms a common penny into a collector treasure. When you look at a 1972 cent in detail, you will notice that the coin is composed of a bronze alloy of 95% copper and 5% tin and zinc. This composition had been the standard since 1909, except during World War II, when in 1943, cents were struck in zinc-coated steel to save copper for the war effort in 1972. The copper-based cent was still a familiar fixture of everyday commerce, but rising copper prices would later force the U.S. Mint to change the composition in 1982 to a copper-plated zinc core, making the 1972 cent one of the last generations of true copper-based pennies. On the obverse of the coin, the bust of Lincoln designed by Victor David Brenner still dominates. He is shown in profile facing right. With his distinctive beard, the word liberty appears to the left of Lincoln. The motto, "In God We Trust," arches across the top, and the date appears to the right. Beneath the date is where the mint mark is found if present. Brenner's initials VDB are located at the truncation of Lincoln's shoulder on the reverse. The design by Frank Gasparo features the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., and careful inspection reveals a tiny depiction of the statue of Lincoln visible between the columns. This is the only U.S. coin where a president appears on both sides, once in portrait and once as a statue. In terms of collecting, the 1972 cent can be approached in multiple ways. A casual collector may want just a basic set of Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco issues, while a more serious collector may hunt for the famous double die obverse FS 101, which can command hundreds or even thousands of dollars in high grade. The minor double dies also appeal to variety specialists, while proof coins from San Francisco, especially those with cameo or deep cameo contrast, are prized by modern proof enthusiasts. Condition also plays a huge role, while circulated examples are abundant. Uncirculated cents with strong luster and clean surfaces are scarcer, and registry collectors seek out top population. Examples graded by services like PCGS and NGC, the economic and cultural backdrop of 1972, also adds context to this penny. It was the early 1970s, a time of political change, economic challenges, and cultural shifts. Richard Nixon was president, the Vietnam War was still ongoing, and inflation was becoming a concern. Coins like the cent carried real purchasing power. In those days, a penny could still buy something small, like a piece of candy, and children across the country saved these coins in piggy banks or searched through their change looking for wheat cents or odd varieties. The 1972 doubled die became known to collectors not long after its release, and for many, it sparked the thrill of the hunt, searching through rolls of pennies. For the rare variety became a pastime for collectors young and old. The legacy of the 1972 penny lies not only in its huge mintage, but also in the importance of its double die obverse. It stands alongside other famous Lincoln cent varieties like the 1955 doubled die, the 1969 S double die, and the 1983 double die reverse as one of the great collectible errors of the series. It teaches us about the minting process, the imperfections of technology, and the excitement that collectors feel when chance creates rarity in an otherwise common coin. So when you think about the 1972 Lincoln penny, do not see just a small copper coin. See a story that ties together the artistry of Victor David Brenner and Frank Gasparo, the production power of the Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco mints, the historical weight of Abraham Lincoln, the economic backdrop of 1970s America, and the thrill of discovery that collectors experience when they find a double die obverse in their change. This penny is history, art, and treasure all rolled into one, and its story continues to fascinate collectors today.